My phone buzzed at 1:07 in the morning. I was still at my desk. Not unusual for me. I'm a CIO and founding partner at a tech consulting firm in Denver, and late nights come with the territory. I had 3 monitors open, a cold cup of coffee to my left that I'd forgotten about hours ago, and a line of code on the middle screen that wasn't behaving the way it was supposed to. So when the notification lit up my phone, I reached for it without thinking. Probably a server alert, maybe a client overseas. I pick it up, glance at the screen. It was a text from Victoria, my wife, except the message didn't read like Victoria. She's occupied right now. She'll call you later. I read it once. I read it again. I set the phone face down on the desk, placed both hands flat on the surface, and I sat very still for about 4 seconds. The kind of still that happens when your brain is processing something faster than your emotions can catch up. Then I picked the phone back up. The number was hers. The contact name said Vic. But those words, that casual, almost dismissive explanation, did not come from my wife. I knew that the same way I know when a network has been compromised, not from a flashing warning, from a pattern that doesn't fit. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed back 2 sentences, and I put the phone down again. 14 minutes later, my front doorbell rang. Welcome to what I'm calling the night everything changed. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Before we get into it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. I promise you, you're going to want to be here for this. Let me back up. Because to understand what that text meant, you need to understand who I was before I received it, and who I thought Victoria was. I'm Ethan Caldwell, 37 years old. I was born and raised in Colorado Springs, the youngest of 3 boys. My father managed a hardware distribution warehouse for 31 years. My mother taught middle school science until her knees gave out. They weren't wealthy people, but they were precise people. They believed in work, in accuracy, in following through on what you said you'd do. I absorbed that. By the time I was 22, I had a computer science degree from the University of Colorado Boulder and a very clear picture of what I wanted to build. Not a job, a company. I wanted to build something that would still be standing in 30 years. I partnered with 2 guys from my graduating class, Jordan Merritt and Tyler Beck, and we started ClearPath Technologies. We did IT infrastructure consulting for mid-sized businesses. We were good at it. Good enough that by the time I turned 31, we had 42 employees, offices in Denver and Austin, and a contract with a healthcare network covering 7 states. I didn't advertise it. I drove the same truck I bought at 28, still lived in the same house in the Washington Park neighborhood that I'd bought before the market went absolutely insane, and I wore the same brand of no-frills watches I'd been wearing since college. Quiet. Focused. That was the approach. I met Victoria at a networking dinner for tech leaders in the Denver metro area. She was 30 at the time, working as a director of operations at a commercial real estate company called Hartfield Group, one of the larger private firms operating out of lower downtown. She was sharp, put together, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately started reading it, figuring out who was worth talking to, where the value was. She introduced herself before I could introduce myself to anyone else. That should have told me something. We dated for 11 months. I proposed at Red Rocks, not during a concert, not with some elaborate production. Just the 2 of us, early on a Tuesday morning, watching the sun come up over the amphitheater. I had the ring in my jacket pocket, and I just decided it was the right moment. Victoria cried. Real tears, I believed. We got married on a Saturday in September, 3 years before the night I'm telling you about. Small ceremony in Estes Park. The mountains behind us. 41 people we actually cared about in attendance. My brother Connor was my best man. Victoria's maid of honor was her college roommate, a woman named Brooke, who flew in from Seattle. The first year was good. Genuinely good. We bought a house together, a renovated Craftsman in Wash Park, 4 blocks from the one I'd sold to make the down payment. Victoria threw herself into decorating it, and I threw myself into work, and we had dinners on the porch most evenings, and it felt like we'd figured something out. I want to be honest about the second year. Things changed, and I noticed, and I told myself a story about it. That's what people do, isn't it? They notice the shift, and they construct an explanation that doesn't require them to blow up their own life. Victoria's company, Hartfield Group, promoted her to VP of Operations at the end of year 1 of our marriage. Her new boss, the executive director of the whole commercial division, was a man named Derek Sloan, 51 years old, silver-haired, the kind of guy who wore expensive suits to casual meetings and drove a black Range Rover with personalized plates. I met Derek 3 times. Once at a company event Victoria brought me to, once at a charity dinner downtown, and once when he stopped by our house unexpectedly to drop off documents Victoria had forgotten at the office. I didn't love that one. Not because anything happened, but because of how comfortable he seemed standing on my porch. Like he'd been there before, at least in his mind. Victoria started working late. Not occasionally, regularly. Tuesday nights she was reliably not home until after 9. Some Fridays she'd text to say she was going to grab dinner with colleagues, and I'd find her home at midnight. She said the role demanded it. Derek was a demanding boss, she told me. High expectations, tight timelines. She wanted to prove herself. I believed her. I believed her because I understood what it looked like to be completely consumed by building something. I had done it myself for years. I gave her the same grace I would have wanted someone to give me. I started noticing her phone first. The way she'd flip it face down on the counter when I walked into a room. The way she'd take it with her to the bathroom every single time. The way she'd glance at it at dinner and then say nothing, put it away, and change the subject. I noticed the perfume situation. There's a scent she'd worn since we started dating. Something light, a little floral. She bought it at Nordstrom every few months. But occasionally she'd come home wearing something else. Something heavier. The kind of fragrance that doesn't belong to the person wearing it. I noticed that she'd stopped asking about my work. For the first year, she was genuinely curious. How's the Austin office? How's the healthcare contract? What's the thing you're trying to solve right now? Then she stopped asking. I don't know exactly when. Just one day I realized I couldn't remember the last time she'd asked. I noticed that she laughed differently on the phone. Not with me. She'd step out to the back porch and I'd hear laughter through the glass door. A different cadence than I was used to. Lighter. More unguarded. I noticed all of it. And every time I made a choice to file it away instead of confronting it. Not because I was afraid. Because I'm a systems person. I don't blow up the machine before I understand what's actually broken. I gathered data first. The data gathered slowly over 6 months. Then a Tuesday night in March gave me all the data I needed. I want you to understand what I do for a living, because it's relevant to what happened next. I build and maintain secure digital infrastructure. I understand networks. I understand access points, data flows, and metadata. I understand what a digital footprint looks like, and I understand how to read one. I'm not going to get into every detail of what I found. What I'll say is this. When I started looking in the right places, the picture became very clear, very quickly. There were patterns in our home network that pointed to regular extended communication happening on a device I didn't recognize. There were timestamps. There was a location trail available through a shared account we both used for family calendar purposes that showed Victoria spending several Tuesday evenings in an area of Lodo that didn't line up with any office address for Hartfield Group. The location that kept coming up was a hotel. A boutique place called the Oxford Hotel on 17th Street, right in the heart of lower downtown Denver. 47 floors below the kind of penthouse suites that Derek Sloan, according to his company profile, kept on a corporate account. That last part I found through entirely legitimate professional research. Derek Sloan and Hartfield Group were publicly documented. His compensation structure, his corporate expense accounts, his real estate holdings, all of it filtered through various public business filings and industry reports. I simply read what was already there. I had enough to know the truth. I sat with it for 2 weeks before I decided what to do about it. I want to be clear about those 2 weeks. I didn't spiral. I didn't drink too much. I didn't stew in rage and pace the kitchen at 3 in the morning. I ate dinner. I went to work. I built things. I had conversations with Victoria about perfectly normal topics, and I was present for every single one of them. Because that's not weakness. That's what you do when you're not done thinking yet. You stay calm. You stay clear. And you plan. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Ogle, family law specialist in Denver, someone I'd been referred to years ago by Jordan Merritt when he went through a brutal divorce and needed someone who didn't flinch. I told Patricia what I had and what I knew. She didn't waste a word. Do you want to save the marriage, or do you want to protect yourself? I thought about that for longer than I expected to. Protect myself, I said finally. Thoroughly. Patricia nodded in that measured way she had, like she'd been expecting that answer. Then don't tip your hand yet. Let me start drafting. We'll be ready when you're ready. I also called my financial advisor, a man named Greg Hollister, and had a frank conversation about asset separation. ClearPath Technologies had been mine long before Victoria entered the picture. My equity stake, my founding partner shares, all of it was documented. But there were marital assets we'd accumulated over 3 years, and I wanted those properly inventoried before anything changed. Greg spent a week helping me get everything organized, documented, and in order. He never asked me to explain myself. He just said, "I'll have it ready whenever you need it." Turns out I needed it sooner than I planned. 2 weeks into my quiet preparation, on a Wednesday night, Victoria texted me at 6:15 to say she was staying late. Big project deadline, she said. Derek was riding everyone hard. She'd be home by 10, maybe 11. I said, "No problem. I'll leave dinner in the fridge." I didn't leave dinner in the fridge. I sat at my desk at home and I worked, because that's what I do when I need to think, and I let the evening pass. At 11:40, she wasn't home. At 12:50, still nothing. At 1:07 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Victoria's contact, Victoria's number, and those words. "She's occupied right now. She'll call you later." I read that message, and something very cold and very steady settled into my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something more like finality. Because someone had looked at my wife's phone, seen missed texts from a contact labeled Ethan, and decided to reply. Not her. Him. And he didn't even try to pretend. He just answered casually, the way you answer for someone when you feel entitled enough to answer for them. "She's occupied. She'll call you later." Like I was a minor inconvenience. Like I was a work call she could get back to when she had a free moment. I sat there for a few seconds. Then I typed back, "No need. You can have her. We're done." I sent it and put the phone face down on the desk and went back to the line of code I'd been staring at. 14 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I walked to the front door without hurrying. I knew who it was before I opened it. I looked through the peephole first, old habit, and there they were on my porch. Victoria, still in her work clothes, coat half on like she'd thrown it on while running. And Derek Sloan, standing 2 steps behind her, hands in his pockets, looking considerably less comfortable than he had that time he stood on my porch to drop off documents. Victoria was already talking when I opened the door. "Ethan, please, it's complicated, and I know how that sounds, but I need you to let me explain." I held the door open. Not for her. Out of basic courtesy for the conversation, I'd already decided would be the last one we'd have in this house. "Come in," I said. "Both of you." That surprised them. She'd expected tears, probably, or a door slammed in her face, or shouting. Derek looked like a man who'd prepared for a specific confrontation and had just realized the terrain was completely different than he'd mapped. They came in, Victoria toward the living room, Derek stopping in the entryway like he wasn't sure whether he'd been invited or instructed. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, took a long sip, set the glass down. "Ethan." Victoria followed me in. Her eyes were red. I couldn't tell if she'd been crying already or if the cold air outside had done that. "Whatever you're thinking, just listen to me first. Please." "I'm listening," I said. "Nothing happened tonight. I mean, something happened, but it's not what that text." She stopped. Reset. "Derek grabbed my phone to check something and he saw your texts and he just responded without... He shouldn't have done that." Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had the decency to look like he knew what he'd triggered. "Ethan, I owe you an apology. That was stupid of me. I wasn't thinking." I looked at him for a moment. "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it in the sense that it told me everything about his character that I needed to know. The kind of man who grabs his employee's phone to check something at 1 in the morning is not a man who's there for business reasons. Victoria put her hands out. Ethan, I love you. I know I've been distant, and I know things have been off, and I should have talked to you instead of... Instead of what? I asked. Silence. Instead of what, Victoria? Her hands dropped. I made a mistake, she said quietly. I made a terrible mistake, and I am so sorry. I nodded. I let that sit in the kitchen for a moment. Then I said, I know you did. I've known for a while. Both of them went very still. I've spent the last 2 weeks making sure that when this conversation happened, I was ready for it. Not you. Me. I looked at Derek. My attorney has already been working. My financials are already organized. The only thing that was waiting was the right moment. I looked back at Victoria. You just handed it to me. Victoria started crying then. Real tears, probably. The kind that come when the thing you were hoping to control slips completely out of your hands. Ethan, please. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can... No. I said it simply. Without anger. Without volume. No. Derek stepped forward slightly. Look, I know this looks bad. I turned to face him, and I want you to know that I was perfectly calm when I did it. I'd be careful, I said, about what you say next, because I'm going to need you to be a witness to what your employee tells you happened in this kitchen tonight, and I'd hate for the record to start with something dishonest. He went quiet. I asked them both to leave. They left. I closed the front door, walked back to my desk, picked up the phone, and texted Patricia Ogle. We're moving. Whenever you're ready. She wrote back at 7:14 the next morning. Already started. Come in at noon. If you've been listening for a while, do us one favor before we keep going. Hit the subscribe button. A lot of people watch without doing it, and it costs you nothing. Hit like while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. Here's the part people don't expect when I tell this story. They expect the revenge to be dramatic, a confrontation, some kind of public reckoning. And I understand why. That's what movies have trained us to want. The big scene, the explosive moment where everything comes out in the open and someone is visibly destroyed. That's not how it went. That's not how I work. Patricia filed the divorce petition on a Thursday morning. Victoria was served at her office on Friday afternoon. I wasn't there. I was in our Austin office going over Q2 projections with Tyler Beck when Patricia texted me that it had been delivered. I kept working. That was a choice. The document was thorough. Patricia had spent 2 weeks building it. It outlined, in precise and legally airtight language, the grounds for the dissolution of the marriage, and it was accompanied by a financial disclosure package that made Victoria's attorney, when he received it, reportedly ask for a recess. Because what Victoria didn't know, what she'd never asked about closely enough to know, was the actual scope of ClearPath Technologies. She knew I had a company. She knew we did well. She didn't know we'd closed a strategic acquisition 3 months into our marriage that had doubled the company's valuation. She didn't know about the equity structure that protected Jordan, Tyler, and me as founding partners. She didn't know about the real estate holdings I'd organized under a separate LLC before we ever met. She had been living in my house, driving a car I'd bought, benefiting from a lifestyle funded entirely by work she had never once asked me to explain in detail. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed before the wedding, something she'd agreed to with minimal pushback, something I'd assumed was just a formality, turned out to be the cleanest piece of paperwork I'd ever put my name on. Patricia had reviewed it the day after I called her, and told me it was, in her words, precisely drafted. Victoria's attorney's first phone call to Patricia was to discuss settlement terms. There were no settlement terms to discuss. The prenuptial agreement had already established them. That's the thing about preparation. People who assume you're not paying attention tend to underestimate everything. They don't look closely at what you've built because they've already decided what they think you are. And then one day, the document lands on their attorney's desk, and the number on the first page doesn't match the picture they had of you in their head. Victoria tried to reach me 3 more times in the 2 weeks after the petition was filed, once by phone, which I didn't answer, once through a letter written by hand that I found in the mailbox, her handwriting, 3 pages, which I read completely, and then filed with the divorce documents, and once through my brother Connor, who called me on a Tuesday and said, "Vic asked me to reach out. She wants to talk to you." I said, "Connor, do you know what happened?" He said he knew some of it. I said, Then you know I'm not going to take that call. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know. I just told her I'd ask. I appreciated that. He wasn't advocating for her. He was just my brother trying to be fair to someone who'd asked him for help. Now, let me tell you about Derek Sloan. Because Derek Sloan, it turned out, had a problem that was larger than the one he'd created in my marriage. I mentioned that my company does IT infrastructure consulting for mid-sized businesses. What I didn't mention is that two of our longest-standing clients were commercial real estate firms in the Denver metro area. Standard work: network architecture, data security, cloud migration, nothing unusual. One of those clients was a company called Ridgecrest Capital, which held investment stakes in several commercial properties. They'd been a ClearPath client for 4 years. About 6 weeks after the divorce petition was filed, Ridgecrest's CFO, a woman named Sandra Chow, asked for an urgent meeting. I drove over to their office on Larimer Street on a Wednesday afternoon, thinking it was a cybersecurity concern. It wasn't. Sandra closed the office door and slid a folder across the table. We've been looking at some irregular transactions tied to a property management contract, she said. The firm running that contract is Hartfield Group. The executive overseeing the account is a man named Derek Sloan. I kept my face neutral. Tell me what you're seeing. What she showed me was a pattern of inflated service contracts, vendor relationships that existed primarily on paper, and a small but consistent stream of payments routed through a subcontractor that, when traced back, led to a holding company with a registered address in Greenwood Village. A holding company that, according to the Colorado Secretary of State's business registration database, was partially owned by Derek Sloan, under a name I'd need to look at twice to recognize. Sandra wasn't asking me to investigate. She was asking me to recommend a digital forensics firm that could help their attorneys document the trail. I recommended one. A firm I knew well. Run by a man named Paul Greer, who had spent 12 years in cybersecurity before going independent, and who understood how to pull a complete, court-admissible picture out of a financial data trail. I didn't do any of the work myself. I had no reason to be involved. I simply told Sandra that Paul was the best I knew, gave her his number, and went home. 6 weeks after that, Hartfield Group received a notice from Ridgecrest Capital's legal team. 3 weeks after that, Derek Sloan placed his company-owned Range Rover back in the Hartfield Group fleet and quietly resigned his position. I didn't make any of that happen directly. Paul Greer did his job. Sandra Chow's attorneys did their job. The money trail did what money trails always do when someone competent starts following them. I heard about it from Jordan Merritt, who had a contact at one of the title companies involved. He called me at the office, laughing. Your wife's boss just got walked out of Hartfield, he said. Former wife, I said. Right, former. Anyway, did you know about that? I knew enough, I said. Man. Jordan was quiet for a second. You know what scares me most about you? What? How quiet you are when you're paying the most attention. The divorce was finalized on a Friday morning in late spring. I drove to Patricia's office, signed the final papers, and she shook my hand across her desk with the kind of professional warmth that lawyers develop for clients who've handled difficult situations with unusual composure. What are you going to do now? She asked. I thought about it. I'm going to go to Red Rocks, I said. She smiled. Alone? Yeah. It's a good place to think. I drove out there that afternoon. Not during a concert, just me, early evening, sitting in the empty amphitheater as the light went golden over the rock formations, and Denver spread out below me in the distance. I had a coffee from the place on Morrison Road, and I just sat with the quiet for about 40 minutes. I thought about the night I proposed at that spot. I thought about what I'd believed about the woman I was proposing to. I thought about the night the text came through, and the 2 weeks of careful preparation before that, and the conversation at the front door, and the document that landed on an attorney's desk and rearranged everything. I want to be honest about what I felt sitting there. Not triumphant. Triumph is for people who were playing a game. I wasn't playing a game. I was responding to a betrayal with the only thing I actually know how to do well, which is think clearly and build carefully and not waste motion on drama that doesn't move things forward. I felt something closer to relief. The kind that comes not from winning, but from being done. From having the record be accurate. From knowing that every decision I made through those months was one I could explain completely and without embarrassment to anyone who ever asked. Here's where things stand now, 8 months later. ClearPath Technologies closed the fiscal year with its best quarter in company history. We brought on a healthcare network in 3 new states and added 11 people to the team. Jordan Merritt is talking about opening a 3rd office in Nashville. Tyler Beck is working on a product we're not ready to announce yet, but that I'm genuinely excited about. I sold the Craftsman House in Washington Park. Not because I had to, it was in my name, protected by the prenup, but because I didn't want it anymore. Too many rooms that felt like someone else's choices. I bought a place in the Highlands neighborhood, smaller, with a good view of the Platte River and enough space for exactly what I need. My brother Connor came to help me move. We carried boxes in silence for most of the morning, and over lunch he said, "You know, I never actually liked Victoria that much." "You never said that." "You seemed happy." What was I supposed to say? That's my brother. He drove back to Colorado Springs that afternoon and texted me that night. "New place suits you. You look like yourself again." I didn't know I'd looked like anything else, but I believed him. Victoria is working at a different company now, a smaller property management firm in Cherry Creek. I know this because Denver is not a large city among people who work in professional services, and information travels. I don't track her. I just hear things sometimes. I don't feel anything particular when I do. Derek Sloan is no longer with Hartfield Group, as I mentioned. I don't know where he is. I don't care enough to look. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that settled in me that night at Red Rocks and hasn't left, is this. The text came in at 1:07 in the morning. A man who felt entitled enough to answer my wife's phone to tell me she was busy sent me a message he thought would keep me quiet for a few more hours, long enough for them to wrap up whatever they were doing, long enough for me to fall asleep, and for the lie to continue for one more night. What he didn't know is that I'd already been awake for that lie for 6 months, that I'd been quietly doing the work of someone who knows the system is compromised and is building a clean one alongside it. That by the time that text arrived, I was ready. Not angry. Ready. 2 words ended a marriage, but 2 years of paying attention made those 2 words possible. No need. You can have her. We're done. I meant every syllable. The thing about betrayal is that it always thinks it's invisible. It always believes the other person is too comfortable, too busy, too trusting to notice. And sometimes it's right. But sometimes the person on the other end of that lie is someone who built a company from nothing, who understands how systems work, who knows that the quietest person in the room is the one worth watching. I'm Ethan Caldwell. I'm the CIO and founding partner of ClearPath Technologies. I drive the same truck I bought at 28. I wear the same watches. I go to Red Rocks when I need to think. And I paid attention. That's the whole story.